the Medici. Just saying the name conjures images of Renaissance grandeur, breathtaking art, and whispers of power. But beneath the velvet cloaks and gilded palaces, this family wielded a different kind of brush, one that painted the streets of Florence and beyond with fear, exile, and blood. They were patrons of genius, yes, but also masters of brutal control. From the quiet machinations of a cunning banker to the terrifying wrath of a queen, the Medici were not afraid to silence dissent with devastating force. Forget everything you thought you knew about these legendary rulers. Their history is stained with moments of chilling brutality. Number 1. Catherine de Medici and the horrific St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The year is 1572. France is a nation torn apart by religious conflict. For years, Huguenots, French Protestants, and Catholics have been clashing in a series of brutal civil wars. At the heart of this volatile kingdom sits a woman of Medici blood, Catherine de Medici. She is the mother of King Charles IX, and in truth, she is the real power behind the French throne. Catherine has always been a master of political maneuvering, a survivor in a court rife with intrigue and danger. She initially tried to broker peace between the warring factions, even arranging the marriage of her Catholic daughter, Margaret of Valois, to the Protestant leader, Henry of Navarre. This marriage was meant to be a symbol of reconciliation, a step towards healing the deep wounds that crisscrossed the French landscape. People from both sides flocked to Paris for the grand celebration, an unprecedented gathering of the French elite. But the peace was a fragile illusion. Just days after the wedding, on August 22nd, 1572, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a prominent Huguenot leader and close advisor to the young King Charles IX, was shot in the street. He was wounded but not killed. This assassination attempt immediately ignited suspicion and fear among the Huguenots gathered in the city. It was widely believed to be the work of the Guise family, staunch Catholics who despised Coligny, or possibly even Catherine herself, though she denied it furiously. The atmosphere in Paris became thick with dread. Huguenot nobles who had come to the capital under a guarantee of safe conduct felt trapped, their lives suddenly in extreme peril. They demanded justice for Coligny and protection from further attacks. What followed was a decision of unimaginable horror. The specifics of how the final order was given remain debated by historians to this day, a dark stain on the annals of French history. Some accounts suggest Catherine, along with a select group of Catholic advisors, convinced the young King Charles IX that the Huguenots were plotting an uprising in retaliation for Coligny's shooting. They painted a picture of a Protestant coup, a threat to the monarchy itself. Other theories propose that Catherine, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity to decisively eliminate the Huguenot leadership in one fell swoop, believing it would restore stability to her son's troubled reign. Whatever the final spark, the decision was made. The king, after much agonizing, reportedly cried out, "Then kill them all so that not one is left to reproach me." In the pre-dawn hours of August 24th, 1572, the feast day of St. Bartholomew, the bells of St. Germain-l'Auxerrois Church began to toll. This was the signal. Almost instantly, Catholic mobs, already inflamed by years of religious hatred and fear, erupted from the shadows. They had been secretly armed and organized, their fury barely contained. The target was clear: the Huguenots. The slaughter began in the streets, in the homes, and even within the Louvre Palace itself. Admiral Coligny, still recovering from his wounds, was one of the first victims. Assassins burst into his room, stabbed him, and threw his body from a window. His head was then reportedly severed and sent to Catherine de Medici and the Duke of Guise, a gruesome trophy. The violence was indiscriminate and terrifyingly efficient. Catholic citizens marked their homes with white crosses to distinguish themselves from their Protestant neighbors, though this did little to protect everyone. Anyone suspected of being a Huguenot was hunted down. Men, women, and children were dragged from their beds, chased through the streets, and brutally murdered. Piles of bodies accumulated in alleys and floated down the Seine River. The sounds of screams, gunfire, and the clanging of swords filled the Parisian night. The blood ran so freely in the streets that it was said to turn the gutters red. Witnesses recounted horrifying scenes of torture, mutilation, and extreme cruelty. A chronicler of the time, Jacques-Auguste de Thou, described how the streets were covered with dead bodies and the river was filled with them. The massacre was not confined to Paris. Within days, the violence spread to other cities across France, fueled by royal orders and local Catholic fervor. Rouen, Orleans, Lyon, Bourges, and Toulouse all experienced their own waves of horrific killings. Estimates of the total number of dead vary wildly, from 5,000 to 30,000 or even higher. It was a purge on an unprecedented scale, a deliberate act of state-sanctioned terror designed to cripple the Protestant movement in France. The long-term impact was catastrophic. While it did weaken the Huguenots in the short term, it also hardened their resolve and plunged France into further decades of religious wars. Catherine de Medici, this woman of Medici lineage, had orchestrated or at least sanctioned one of the most infamous acts of brutality in European history. She claimed it was a necessary evil, a preemptive strike, to save the monarchy from rebellion. However, the sheer scale of the slaughter, the treachery involved in inviting the Huguenot leaders to Paris under false pretenses of peace, and the indiscriminate nature of the killings paint a picture of extreme ruthlessness. The event cemented her reputation as a cold, calculating, and ultimately terrifying political force. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre stands as a stark reminder of the lengths to which a Medici ruler, even one far from Florence, would go to maintain and consolidate power. It was a moment of true horror, a wound in the heart of France that would take generations to heal. The echoes of those ringing bells and the cries of the dying still reverberate through the history books. Number 2, Cosimo I de Medici and the brutal fall of Siena. The year is 1555. Florence, under the firm hand of Cosimo I de Medici, is rising to become a powerful duchy. Cosimo, a descendant of the elder Cosimo, is a very different kind of ruler. He is not just a banker or a patron, he is a soldier, a statesman, and a man utterly determined to expand Medici power and territory. His ambition knows no bounds. Across the rolling hills of Tuscany, just south of Florence, lies Siena, a proud and ancient republic, a traditional rival to Florentine power. Siena, fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of Medici dominance, had been a thorn in Florence's side for centuries. It was also a refuge for Florentine exiles, those republicans who dreamed of overthrowing Medici rule and restoring the old Florentine Republic. This made Siena a direct threat to Cosimo's absolute authority. Cosimo I, having allied himself with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and later Philip II of Spain, saw an opportunity to finally crush Siena. The city had fallen under the influence of France, a direct challenge to the emperor's authority in Italy. This gave Cosimo the perfect pretext for war. He convinced the emperor to lend him military support, portraying the conflict as a joint imperial Florentine effort to rid Italy of French influence and subdue a rebellious city. The stage was set for one of the most prolonged and devastating sieges of the Renaissance. The siege of Siena began in January 1554. Cosimo's forces, led by the ruthless Gian Giacomo de Medici, no direct relation, but a highly effective commander, surrounded the city. The Sienese, though outnumbered and outgunned, were defiant. They prepared for a desperate defense, their citizens taking up arms, building fortifications, and repairing walls. Inside the city, they knew their fate depended on their own courage and resilience. The siege lasted for an agonizing 17 months. It was not a battle of pitched armies, but a slow, grinding war of attrition designed to starve the city into submission. Cosimo I understood the power of starvation as a weapon. He ordered his commanders to cut off all supply lines to Siena. No food, no fresh water, no reinforcements were allowed to enter the city. The Florentine imperial forces systematically destroyed crops in the surrounding countryside and massacred anyone attempting to bring supplies to the beleaguered Sienese. As the months wore on, the situation inside Siena became desperate. Food supplies dwindled, and hunger became a constant gnawing presence. The Sienese were forced to eat anything they could find: cats, dogs, rats, leather, even boiled leaves. Disease, fueled by malnutrition and poor sanitation, swept through the population, claiming lives indiscriminately. The sounds of cannon fire were a constant reminder of the encroaching doom. Despite the horrific conditions, the Sienese continued to resist with extraordinary bravery. Women, known as the Donne Sienesi, played a vital role, working on fortifications, nursing the wounded, and even fighting alongside the men. But their courage could not overcome the overwhelming might of Cosimo's forces and the relentless grip of starvation. By early 1555, the city was at its breaking point. People were dying in the streets from hunger and disease. The proud republic was reduced to a skeleton of its former self. On April 17, 1555, with no hope of relief and no food left, Siena finally surrendered. The surrender was not the end of Siena's nightmare. It was merely the beginning of its transformation under Medici rule. What followed was a brutal crackdown designed to break Siena's spirit and ensure it would never again pose a threat to Florentine dominance. Cosimo I was merciless. Thousands of Sienese citizens, weakened by hunger and disease, were forced to leave the city. Many died on the journey, unable to withstand the hardships. The city's population plummeted from around 40,000 before the siege to a mere 8,000 after. Those who remained were subjected to severe repression. Cosimo stationed a large garrison of Florentine and imperial soldiers in Siena, effectively turning it into an occupied territory. Any sign of dissent was met with brutal force. The city's ancient republican institutions were dismantled. The old Sienese nobility and prominent families were stripped of their power and influence. Cosimo appointed Florentine officials to govern the city, ensuring that all authority flowed directly from him. There were numerous executions of those deemed rebels or threats to the new order. The records from the Florentine State Archives, as detailed by historian Carlo Galuzzi, indicate summary trials and swift punishments for anyone suspected of disloyalty. Prominent Sienese citizens who had led the resistance were imprisoned, tortured, or publicly executed to set an example. Their properties were confiscated, adding to Cosimo's growing treasury. The brutalization of Siena was not just about military conquest. It was about breaking the psychological will of a proud people. Cosimo I wanted to send an unmistakable message to anyone who dared to challenge his authority. He showed no mercy, demonstrating a cold, calculated ruthlessness that defined his reign. The fall of Siena and the subsequent repression cemented Cosimo's control over Tuscany, expanding the Grand Duchy of Tuscany to its largest extent. It was a chilling display of power, a testament to Cosimo I's iron will and his readiness to employ extreme violence to achieve his political goals. The memory of the siege and the subsequent crackdown left an indelible mark on Siena, forever changing its destiny and ensuring its subservience to the rising power of the Medici in Florence. The screams of the starving and the cries of the defeated resonated for generations, a brutal footnote in the Medici's rise to absolute power. Number 3. Alessandro de' Medici and the Reign of Terror. The year's 1530. Florence, after years of turbulent republican experiments and papal machinations, finds itself under the thumb of a new kind of Medici ruler, Alessandro de' Medici. He is the first Duke of Florence, a title bestowed upon him by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, following the brutal siege of Florence. This siege, an 11-month ordeal that decimated the city, had been orchestrated by the Emperor and Pope Clement VII himself, a Medici, to finally crush Florentine republicanism and impose dynastic Medici rule. Alessandro, often referred to as the Moor due to his darker complexion, was likely the illegitimate son of Pope Clement VII, or possibly of Lorenzo the Magnificent's younger brother, Giuliano. His ascent marked a stark departure from the more subtle, behind-the-scenes power of earlier Medici generations. Alessandro was an imposed ruler backed by foreign armies, and his rule would be characterized by fear, repression, and violence. After the surrender of Florence in August 1530, the city was prostrate. The Republican defenders, weakened by hunger and disease, had fought bravely but were ultimately no match for the overwhelming imperial forces. The terms of surrender were harsh. The emperor dissolved the Republican government, and Alessandro was installed as hereditary ruler. This was a radical change for Florence, a city that had prided itself on its Republican traditions, however flawed. For many Florentines, particularly the staunch Republicans, and those who had fought in the siege, Alessandro's rule was an illegitimate tyranny, a betrayal of everything Florence stood for. Alessandro understood that his power was not built on popular support, but on the strength of imperial bayonets. To maintain control, he instituted a draconian crackdown on any form of dissent or Republican sentiment. His rule became a de facto reign of terror. He relied heavily on his personal guard, often composed of Swiss mercenaries and trusted soldiers, to enforce his will. The city, which had known a certain degree of civic freedom, was now under constant surveillance. And spies and informants were everywhere, reporting any whispers of opposition or criticism. One of the most immediate and brutal aspects of Alessandro's crackdown was the systematic elimination of his political enemies. Many prominent citizens who had actively participated in the Republican defense of Florence were immediately targeted. Some were summarily executed, their bodies left as a warning. Others were imprisoned in the Bargello, the infamous Florentine prison, where torture was a common method of extracting confessions or punishing dissent. The historian Benedetto Varchi, a contemporary of Alessandro, documented numerous cases of citizens being arrested, tortured, and then either executed or exiled without proper trial. Varchi's Storia Fiorentina provides chilling details of Alessandro's methods. Exile became a common fate for those who refused to accept Alessandro's rule. Thousands of Florentines, including many wealthy and influential families, chose to leave the city rather than live under his tyranny. Their properties and assets were often confiscated by the Duke, further enriching his coffers and weakening the Republican opposition. Those who remained faced constant fear. Public gatherings were monitored, and any form of political expression was severely curtailed. The once vibrant Florentine intellectual and political life withered under the oppressive weight of Alessandro's regime. Alessandro's personal behavior also contributed to the atmosphere of terror. He was known for his debauchery, his violent temper, and his disregard for the law. Stories circulated of him abducting women, imposing arbitrary fines, and acting with impunity. While some of these tales might be exaggerated, they contributed to a widespread sense of insecurity and resentment among the populace. The fear of crossing the Duke or his favorite companions was palpable. A major focus of Alessandro's crackdown was on the Florentine exiles who gathered in cities like Venice and Rome, constantly plotting to restore the Republic. These exiles, led by figures like Filippo Strozzi, posed a persistent threat. Alessandro used his imperial connections to pressure other Italian states to deny refuge to Florentine dissidents. He sent agents to infiltrate exile communities and even attempted assassinations. The most significant challenge from the exiles came in 1537, when a group of them, hoping to capitalize on imperial dissatisfaction with Alessandro, launched a military expedition against Florence. This uprising, known as the Battle of Montemerlo, was swiftly crushed by Alessandro's forces, led by his distant cousin, the future Cosimo I. The aftermath of Montemerlo was another wave of brutal repression. The captured exiles were dealt with harshly. Filippo Strozzi, one of the wealthiest and most influential Florentine bankers, was captured and imprisoned. He was tortured and eventually died in prison, either by suicide or murder, a fate that sent shockwaves through Italy. His death was a clear message that no one, no matter how powerful or wealthy, was safe from the Duke's wrath. Other conspirators were publicly executed, further solidifying Alessandro's ruthless reputation. Alessandro's rule was relatively short-lived, lasting only 7 years. He was assassinated in 1537 by his own distant cousin Lorenzino de Medici, who claimed to be acting to free Florence from tyranny. While his assassination brought an end to his personal reign of terror, it did not restore the Republic. Instead, it paved the way for the ascension of Cosimo I, who would continue and even surpass Alessandro's efforts to establish absolute Medici control. Alessandro's period as Duke was a grim chapter in Florentine history, a time when the city traded its ancient, albeit troubled, republican freedoms for the chilling security of an iron-fisted ruler backed by the might of a foreign empire. His legacy is one of fear, repression, and the systematic crushing of dissent, setting the stage for future Medici tyranny. The whispers of fear and the sight of imprisoned citizens defined his brutal crackdown. Number 4. Lorenzo de Medici and the Pazzi conspiracy aftermath. The year is 1478. Florence is at the height of its Renaissance glory, and at its helm is Lorenzo de Medici, known to history as the Magnificent. He is not officially a ruler in the traditional sense. Florence is still nominally a republic. But Lorenzo, through his family's immense wealth, vast network of allies, and shrewd political maneuvering, holds absolute sway over the city. He is a patron of the arts, a poet, a diplomat, and a man who embodies the spirit of his age. Yet, beneath the veneer of cultural brilliance, the Medici's power was built on a complex web of alliances, influence, and the subtle suppression of opposition. Not everyone was content with Medici dominance. A powerful rival family, the Pazzi, along with disgruntled elements within the church and other Florentine factions, viewed Lorenzo as a tyrant who had usurped the Republic's freedom. This simmering resentment boiled over into a meticulously planned assassination plot. The Pazzi family, wealthy bankers and rivals to the Medici, conspired with Archbishop Francesco Salviati of Pisa, Pope Sixtus IV, and other enemies of Lorenzo. The Pope himself was deeply hostile to the Medici, primarily due to their banking influence and their opposition to his expansionist policies in Italy. The goal was audacious: to assassinate both Lorenzo and his popular younger brother Giuliano, at the same time thus decapitating Medici power and allowing their enemies to seize control of Florence. The plot was set for Sunday, April 26, 1478, during High Mass at Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore. The conspirators chose this moment because they knew both brothers would be present and relatively unguarded. As the elevation of the host took place, a moment of profound religious significance, the assassins struck. Giuliano de Medici was brutally stabbed to death, reportedly suffering 19 wounds, one blow so powerful it shattered his skull. Lorenzo, quick-witted and agile, managed to fight off his attackers, receiving only a minor neck wound. He was quickly surrounded by loyal supporters and hustled to safety in the sacristy. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. The city erupted. The conspirators, believing they had succeeded, rushed to the Palazzo della Signoria, Florence's government building, hoping to rally support and declare the restoration of the Republic. But they had fundamentally misjudged the loyalty of the Florentine populace. The people, who had largely benefited from Medici's stability and patronage, did not rise up against Lorenzo. Instead, they rose up for him. The news of Giuliano's murder and the attack on Lorenzo ignited a fierce, visceral, popular backlash against the conspirators. This was not a controlled strategic crackdown from above. It was a spontaneous explosion of popular fury that Lorenzo would skillfully harness and direct. The crackdown was swift and horrifically brutal. The Florentine populace crying "Pau!", the Medici family's coat of arms, hunted down anyone, even remotely connected to the conspiracy. Archbishop Salviati, still in his ecclesiastical robes, was dragged from the Palazzo della Signoria and summarily hanged from the windows of the building alongside other prominent conspirators. His body, still in its vestments, swayed in the wind, a grim spectacle for the horrified onlookers. Francesco de Pazzi, one of the leading conspirators, was similarly apprehended and hanged. His body was so savagely mutilated by the mob that it was barely recognizable. Jacopo de Pazzi, another head of the family, initially escaped but was later captured, brought back to Florence, tortured, and then also hanged. His body, after being buried in a church, was later disinterred by the enraged populace, dragged through the streets, and thrown into the Arno River, a final act of desecration. The fury extended to anyone suspected of being involved. Many priests and clerics who had participated in the plot or were merely present at the time were also brutally killed. People were lynched in the streets without trial. Lorenzo, though recuperating from his wounds, quickly took control of the situation, directing the popular rage towards a systematic elimination of the Pazzi family and their allies. Houses belonging to the Pazzi were sacked and destroyed. The family's coat of arms was chiseled off public buildings and private residences, a symbol of their complete erasure from Florentine life. The crackdowns extended beyond immediate execution. The Medici family confiscated the vast wealth and properties of the Pazzi, further cementing their own financial dominance. Those who were not immediately killed were imprisoned, tortured, or permanently exiled, ensuring that no remnants of the Pazzi family could ever again pose a threat. Records from the Giustizi Straordinari special judicial proceedings showed a relentless pursuit of anyone connected to the plot. The crackdown was a clear message to any potential rivals. Challenging the Medici would result in not just personal ruin, but the complete destruction of one's family name and legacy. But Pope Sixtus IV, enraged by the execution of his archbishop and the perceived slight to the church, excommunicated Lorenzo and the entire city of Florence. He then formed a military alliance with the Kingdom of Naples and declared war on Florence. This war, known as the Pazzi War, dragged on for 2 years, further draining Florence's resources. Lorenzo, with characteristic daring, eventually traveled to Naples in person to negotiate a peace treaty, a move that solidified his diplomatic genius. The Pazzi conspiracy and its brutal aftermath transformed Lorenzo's rule. Before, his power was based on influence and popular goodwill. After, it was reinforced by the chilling demonstration of his absolute control over the city and its people's loyalty. The summary executions, the public desecrations of bodies, and the complete annihilation of a rival family served as a stark warning. The Florentine populace, by supporting Lorenzo's brutal revenge, became complicit in solidifying Medici tyranny. The Pazzi conspiracy was a moment of shocking violence that stripped away the veneer of Florentine republicanism and revealed the raw, unforgiving power that Lorenzo de' Medici wielded. The memory of the bloody cathedral floor and the dangling bodies from the Palazzo della Signoria would haunt Florence for years, a chilling reminder of the price of challenging the magnificent. Number 5, Cosimo de' Medici, the Elder, and the Bloodless Purge. The year is 1433. Florence is a vibrant, wealthy republic, a center of trade, banking, and culture. But beneath its bustling markets and grand cathedrals, political power is a constant tug of war between powerful families. For decades, the Albizzi family has been the dominant force, steering the government and controlling key offices. However, a new power is rising, quietly but relentlessly. The Medici family, led by the astute and incredibly wealthy banker Cosimo de' Medici, often called the Elder or Pater Patriae, father of the country. Cosimo's influence was not based on military might or inherited titles, but on his immense financial resources. His bank was the most powerful in Europe, lending money to popes, kings, and merchants. Through his loans and patronage, he built a vast network of allies and debtors, subtly extending his reach into every corner of Florentine life. This quiet accumulation of power made the old guard, particularly the Albizzi, deeply nervous. The Albizzi, led by the formidable Rinaldo degli Albizzi, saw Cosimo's growing influence as a direct threat to their own long-held supremacy. They accused him of undermining the Republic, of using his wealth to corrupt officials and control elections. In their eyes, Cosimo was becoming too powerful, too indispensable. Their fear eventually escalated into a direct confrontation. In September 1433, Rinaldo degli Albizzi seized an opportunity. With the Signoria, Florence's governing council, packed with his allies, he ordered the arrest of Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo was imprisoned in the Palazzo della Signoria in a small cell known as the Alberghetto. The charge was treason, the accusation being that he sought to subvert the Republic. The situation was perilous for Cosimo. The political prisoners in Florence often faced torture, exile, or even execution. The city held its breath, uncertain of what fate awaited the powerful banker. Cosimo, ever the pragmatist, understood the danger. He cleverly refused food for 4 days, fearing he was being poisoned. Instead, he bribed his jailer, Federico Malavolti, with a substantial sum of money, allowing him to send messages and influence events from his prison cell. He also managed to negotiate a change of venue for his trial, moving it from the Palazzo della Signoria, where Albizzi's influence was strongest, to a more neutral location. Ultimately, a large bribe to members of the Signoria secured his life. Instead of execution, the verdict was exile. Cosimo was banished from Florence for 10 years, exiled to Padua, and then later settled in Venice. Many of his key supporters were also exiled or imprisoned. This seemed like a victory for the Albizzi. They had removed their most dangerous rival. But they had profoundly underestimated Cosimo's enduring influence and the depth of his popular support. Even in exile, the Medici Bank continued to operate, and Cosimo continued to manage his vast network of contacts. There were Florentine merchants and artisans, many of whom owed their livelihoods to Medici patronage or loans, felt the immediate absence of his stabilizing hand. The economy faltered, and the city plunged into economic uncertainty. The Albizzi, meanwhile, proved unable to fill the void left by Cosimo, their rule appearing increasingly inept and unpopular. The common people who had seen Cosimo as a benefactor grew restless under the Albizzi's increasingly heavy-handed governance. Less than a year later, in October 1434, the political winds shifted dramatically. A new Signoria, sympathetic to the Medici, came into power. They immediately summoned Cosimo back to Florence. His return was a triumph. He entered the city to widespread popular acclamation, hailed as a returning hero. This was the true turning point and the beginning of Cosimo's systematic, though largely bloodless, crackdown on his rivals. Upon his return, Cosimo did not resort to the wholesale public executions that would characterize later Medici crackdowns. Instead, he employed a far more insidious and effective method of repression, the systematic use of political exile, financial ruin, and legal manipulation to dismantle his opposition. This was a purge by bureaucratic and economic means rather than outright slaughter. The primary tool for this crackdown was the Balia, a special emergency committee. This body, ostensibly convened to reform the government, was packed with Cosimo's loyalists. The Balia was given broad powers, effectively allowing it to circumvent normal legal procedures. Under its authority, Cosimo's opponents were systematically targeted mass exiles. The most common punishment was forced exile. Rinaldo degli Albizzi, his son Ormano, and many other prominent members of the Albizzi family, along with leading figures from other rival families like the Peruzzi and the Guadagni, were banished from Florence, often for life. These exiles were not allowed to return under pain of death. Their departure effectively removed the entire leadership of the opposing factions. Chroniclers, like Niccolo Machiavelli in his Florentine histories, detail the long lists of prominent citizens forced to abandon their homes and families. Confiscation of wealth. The properties and assets of the exiled families were frequently confiscated by the state, further crippling their ability to fund opposition from afar. This also enriched the Florentine treasury, which was now effectively under Medici control. This economic devastation ensured that exiled families could not easily mount a counterattack. Disqualification from office laws were passed to prevent individuals associated with the anti-Medici faction or even their descendants from holding public office. This effectively shut them out of the political process for generations, ensuring Medici dominance in all governmental bodies. Targeted imprisonment and torture, while executions were rare compared to later periods. Some individuals who were seen as particularly dangerous or who refused to comply were imprisoned and subjected to torture to extract confessions or information, as indicated in scattered records from Florentine notaries. Reforms of government Cosimo systematically changed the mechanisms of government to favor Medici control. The system of drawing lots for public office, for example, was manipulated to ensure that a disproportionate number of Medici loyalists were selected. New councils were created, all designed to consolidate Medici power. Cosimo's crackdown was a masterclass in political subtlety and long-term strategy. He understood that a dramatic bloodbath could alienate the populace and inspire future revolt. Instead, he chose a methodical, systematic dismantling of his enemies' power structures. By removing their leaders, confiscating their wealth, and legally barring them from political participation, he ensured that the opposition was not just defeated but effectively neutralized for decades. The consequence was a long period of internal peace and stability in Florence, but at the cost of its republican freedoms. Cosimo governed from behind the scenes, never holding an official title of supreme ruler, yet his control was absolute. He became the true lord of Florence, pulling the strings of government through his loyal allies and carefully crafted political machinery. His bloodless purge was arguably more terrifying in its efficiency than overt violence, for it demonstrated how thoroughly a powerful family could strip citizens of their rights, their livelihoods, and their very presence in the city, all within the existing legal framework manipulated for their own gain. The whispers of fear and the sight of families leaving their homes, stripped of everything, marked the beginning of Medici dynastic rule.